France before. Napoleon, financial crisis, and the fall of the monarchy. Toward the end of the 18th century, France stood as one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. The palaces were magnificent, the aristocracy fiercely protected its privileges, and the king was still seen as God's representative on earth. But beneath that dazzling image, a quiet decay was spreading, and within just a few years, that decay would destroy not only a dynasty, but an entire social order. Welcome to Finance Historian, stories behind money, markets, and empires. Subscribe, like, leave a comment, and share the video. Thank you. Today, we are going back to France just before Napoleon, from peasants crushed under taxes to the golden halls of Versailles, from financial collapse to public anger, and finally to the fall of the monarchy. Because the French Revolution was not a sudden explosion of rebellion, it was the result of years of economic decline, political blindness, and social injustice. By the late 17th century, France was one of the dominant powers in Europe. The chief architect of this dominance was Louis XIV, known as the Sun King. The grandeur of the Palace of Versailles symbolized the strength of France, but that magnificence came at an enormous cost. Louis XIV fought constant wars, he built massive armies, he spent unimaginable sums on his palace, and all of this gradually drained the royal treasury. Under his successor, Louis XV, little changed. France continued competing for dominance in Europe. The 7 Years' War in particular became a major economic disaster for France. Defeats against Britain meant not only a loss of prestige, but also the loss of colonies and trade revenues. And then, the American War of Independence arrived. This was one of history's greatest ironies. France supported the American colonies in order to weaken Britain. It sent weapons, soldiers, and money. Britain was damaged, yes, but France's own financial system suffered a fatal wound. State debts reached terrifying levels. By the 1780s, France was technically on the verge of bankruptcy. So how could one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms go bankrupt? The answer was actually simple. The tax system had collapsed. French society was divided into 3 estates. The first estate consisted of the clergy, the second estate of the nobility, and the third estate of everyone else: peasants, workers, craftsmen, merchants, and the rising bourgeoisie. The problem was this: the third estate, which made up the overwhelming majority of the population, paid heavy taxes. But the wealthiest groups, the aristocracy and the church, were exempt from many of them. In other words, the burden of the state rested on the shoulders of the poorest people. Peasants did not only pay taxes to the king, they also paid tithes to the church, owed feudal obligations to local lords, and were forced into unpaid labor. The fruits of a peasant's work were divided before they even left the field. Meanwhile, aristocrats hosted lavish balls at Versailles, organized hunting parties, and lived lives completely disconnected from ordinary people. This inequality was not merely economic, it created a deep psychological rupture. Because the third estate was no longer just poor, it felt humiliated. During the 1780s, the crisis worsened. Bad harvests struck the country. Grain production fell, bread prices skyrocketed. And for ordinary French people, bread was the center of daily life. Today, a person may spend only a small portion of their income on food. But in 18th century France, an average worker spent more than half of their income on bread alone. When bread prices rose, it was not simply an economic problem. It meant hunger. In the streets of Paris, people formed long lines outside bakeries. Hunger fueled anger. And at the very same time, the extravagant life of the royal court continued. Queen Marie Antoinette, in particular, became a symbol of wastefulness in the eyes of the people. The famous quote attributed to her, "Let them eat cake," was most likely never actually spoken. But the public wanted to believe it. The gap between the palace and the people had become so enormous that many were convinced their rulers no longer understood them. King Louis XVI was not entirely malicious, but he was indecisive. He was not a strong leader, and most importantly, he lacked the political will necessary to manage a crisis of this scale. One finance minister after another proposed reforms. Figures such as Jacques Necker and Charles-Alexandre de Calonne argued that the aristocracy should also pay taxes. But the nobility fiercely resisted, and here, the monarchy's greatest paradox emerged. The state was collapsing, yet the privileged classes refused to give up their privileges. In many ways, this was exactly what destroyed France: the inability to reform. The royal system was rigid. It resisted change. And that resistance eventually shattered the system completely. By 1788, the royal treasury was nearly empty. Even interest payments on debts could no longer be covered. And Louis XVI made a desperate decision. He called the Estates General, the General Assembly, into session for the first time since 1614. This was an extraordinary moment, because it effectively meant the king was admitting he could no longer rule alone. Representatives from all 3 estates began gathering across France. But another problem quickly appeared. How would voting work? Under the traditional system, each estate had one vote. This meant the clergy and nobility could easily outvote the third estate together. But the third estate was no longer the same old third estate. Among them were lawyers, journalists, educated bourgeois intellectuals, and, most importantly, people influenced by Enlightenment thought. Thinkers such as Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Montesquieu had spent years questioning monarchy, absolute power, and social inequality. Liberty, popular sovereignty, the rule of law, these ideas were no longer confined to books. They were beginning to spill into the streets. When the Estates General convened in 1789, the crisis rapidly transformed into a political revolution. Representatives of the Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly. This was a revolutionary step, because for the first time, sovereignty was claimed to belong not to the king, but to the people. The king attempted to stop the movement, but it was already too late. On June 20th, 1789, representatives gathered in an indoor tennis court and swore the famous tennis court oath, "We will not separate until France has a constitution." That moment marked one of the political breaking points of absolute monarchy. Paris was boiling, the people were starving, troops were gathering around the city, and everyone feared the king would crush the revolution by force. On July 14th, 1789, a crowd marched toward the Bastille prison. In reality, there were very few prisoners inside, but the symbol mattered far more than the building itself. The Bastille represented royal oppression, and when it fell, more than a prison was captured. The wall of fear collapsed as well. The French Revolution had become irreversible. Meanwhile, another kind of chaos erupted in the countryside. Peasants began attacking aristocratic estates. Feudal records were burned. Tax documents were destroyed. The feudal order that had lasted for centuries was beginning to break apart. Then, on the night of August 4th, 1789, the National Assembly made a historic decision. Feudal privileges were abolished. This became one of the greatest social transformations in European history. The idea of inherited privilege had been fundamentally shaken. The belief that a person was superior simply because they were born into a noble family was beginning to collapse. Soon after, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was proclaimed. This document is considered one of the foundations of the modern world. Liberty, equality, national sovereignty, equality before the law. Many ideas that seem ordinary to us today were revolutionary at the time. But there's an important detail to remember. The revolution was not yet fully democratic. Women still lacked political rights. Slavery had not been completely abolished, and economic inequality still remained. The revolution did not instantly create a perfect society of freedom. In reality, revolutions are often chaotic transitions. The old order collapses while the new order has not yet fully formed. France was entering exactly such a transition. Meanwhile, Louis XVI was losing more and more public trust. The turning point came in 1791, when the king attempted to flee the country with his family. This event, known as the Flight to Varennes, ended with the royal family being captured and brought back to Paris. In the eyes of the public, the king was no longer a constitutional leader. He was beginning to look like a traitor. Many believed he was secretly cooperating with foreign powers to crush the revolution. And in truth, those fears were not entirely baseless. The monarchies of Europe were horrified by the French Revolution, because the revolution did not threaten only France. It threatened every monarchy in Europe. In 1792, France was pulled into war. Conflict erupted with Austria and Prussia. War radicalized the revolution even further. The atmosphere in Paris became harsher. The Jacobins were rising. And finally, in 1793, Louis XVI was sent to the guillotine. The execution of a king by his own people shocked Europe, because this was not merely the death of one man. It was the death of the idea that the king is sacred. Yet the collapse of the monarchy did not immediately bring stability to France. Quite the opposite. The Reign of Terror began. Maximilien Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety used extreme measures in the name of protecting the revolution. Thousands of people were sent to the guillotine, former aristocrats, suspected counter-revolutionaries, even former revolutionaries themselves. The revolution had begun to devour its own children. This is one of the tragic dimensions of the French Revolution. A movement that began in the name of liberty gradually produced fear and violence. And yet, amid all this chaos, France had been transformed forever. Feudalism had largely been dismantled. The church had lost much of its power. The monarchy had fallen. The concept of citizenship had grown stronger, and no king in Europe could ever again feel completely secure, because the ideas emerging from France had crossed borders. Nation, popular sovereignty, rights. These concepts had become irreversible. And in the middle of this chaos, a new figure began to rise, a young artillery officer, a Corsican-born soldier, Napoleon Bonaparte. France had spent years exhausted by revolution, economic collapse, internal conflict, and war. People no longer wanted ideals alone. They wanted order. And Napoleon promised exactly that: order, power, victory. But that was the beginning of another story. The story of France before Napoleon reveals an important truth. No system lasts forever. If a state cannot solve economic inequality, if rulers become disconnected from the people, if reforms are endlessly delayed, then even the most powerful systems can collapse suddenly. The golden halls of Versailles could not stop the anger of a starving population. The privileges of the aristocracy could not solve the financial crisis. An absolute monarchy ultimately shattered under its own rigidity. The French Revolution was not only a turning point in French history, but one of the painful birth processes of the modern world. Many of the concepts we now associate with democracy, citizenship, and human rights emerged from those turbulent years. And perhaps that is why the story of France before Napoleon still feels so powerful, still so compelling. Because this story is not only about the past, it is about the limits of power, the breaking points of societies, and humanity's endless search for justice. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and share it. You can turn on the notification bell to stay updated on new videos. See you in the next video.